Hi, boys and girls. Today we are going to be working on measurement and learning how to measure objects. So I am going to have you in your brand new material bag. There's a white folder. Inside that white folder, there is a blue and a pink paper. The pink one has all these ones on it. The blue one has all these tens on it. Again, this was out of your white folder. And I'm going to have you cut these out. And I want you to wait just a second because I want to show you what these will look like when they're cut out. So my first step is going to be to cut out around the outside. And what's really important is we're going to be using these to measure, which means they have to be about the same size. So I cut around the outside and I tried to stay on the line as well as possible. Okay, so go ahead, press pause now while you cut around the outside of each of your papers. I already cut out my tens, but go ahead and cut around the outside. My next step after I cut around the outside is I cut very, very carefully because we're using these as a measuring tool. We'll use them as something else later on, but we're going to start with using them as a measuring tool. So now I cut them into strips. So after you cut around the outside, I want you to very carefully cut them into strips. Go ahead and press pause now while you cut it into strips, both your blue and your pink. After I cut them into strips, then I cut them into their little pieces just by doing one nice cut. And I did not do all the strips at the same time. All right, so now I have all my pieces. And you're going to want to have a spot for these pieces because we are using these as math tools throughout this lesson and some other lessons. So you want to hang on to these. Maybe you'll put them in a Ziploc bag. You know that I have a little cup where I keep my math tools, my cubes, and my counters. Maybe you want to put them in that cup, or it's a special cup that your parents are okay with. But you'll want to make sure these stay in a safe spot. I'm going to use them for this lesson. I don't need all of them, so I'm just going to keep my pink ones, and I'm going to put my blue ones in a safe space. All right, now that we have those cut out, we can move on into our measurement lesson. Now that we have our measuring tool ready to go. What I want you to do right now is imagine a toothpick about this long. See if you can find something that's on your desk or near your area. Find something that's about one toothpick long. Go ahead and press pause while you find something that's about the length of one toothpick. I found 3 cubes, and I would say that's really close to the length of one toothpick. What about find something that's 2 toothpicks long? So now imagine 2 toothpicks about that long, 2 toothpicks. Find something that's about 2 toothpicks long, press pause, and bring it back with you. I found my computer pen, which is a little shorter than a normal pencil, and I would say that's about 2 toothpicks long. I'm making a good guess. I'm picturing toothpicks in my head, and this looks like it would be the length. If I lined up 2 toothpicks, it would be about that length. Now see if you can find something that's about 3 toothpicks long and bring it back with you. Press pause while you find that. I would say maybe one of these sticks that I have with numbers on them. This is about 3 toothpicks, or like a longer pen is about 3 toothpicks. So that's what we're learning about today, is how to make a good guess on how long something is. We'll start on page 747, so go ahead and turn there now if you're not yet. And here's our question. How do you measure length? Take a look at the picture. So I'm seeing these blue squares, and I'm seeing our starting line. I'm seeing this also has an ending line with that pencil. How could you use this to help you figure out how long that pencil is? Are you thinking count the squares? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we could say 6 squares, or we could say 6 units. We used this as 1 unit to measure. Here's what the model it says. It says, what is the length in squares? So it has a starting line. And we want to know how long this crayon is. Our unit or our tool that we're using are these blue squares. So each one of these is a unit. So how many squares is, or about how many, doesn't always have to be exact, is this crayon? You're going to want to count the squares. I count the squares. I see 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say this green crayon is about 4 squares long. Think about how we just found the length of the crayon. I'm going to go back. How did we find the length of the crayon? What were some things that we had to do? And I would think back to when we were learning about comparing lengths. What were some things we had to do? We had to have a starting line, right? You had to line up whatever you were measuring with a starting line. That's important. And this one, though, we want to look at the ending line too, which we were just picturing that in our heads before. Like if we had an object, we would start them all on the starting line, and then we would just take a look at the ends to see which one was shorter and which one was longer. On this, we have a starting line and an ending line, and we're looking at the crayon and how it measures up against those unit squares. Then we counted the squares, right? We had to do some counting. All right, so let's take what we just learned, and you on your paper have a glue stick. I want you to use your pink squares to see about how long is that glue. It's not going to be perfect. So what is it close to? About means what is it close to? So use those pink squares and measure that glue stick. Okay, so here's our glue. I am going to start my squares right on the starting line to line them up with the glue stick. And I still have space, so I'm going to do another one. And I still have space, so I'm going to do another one. All right, and notice I'm lining them up with no gaps between them. I'm lining them up as nicely as I can. Now, I see it fits 2 for sure, and then it's about half of this one, maybe a little less. We can actually, since it's about halfway, we can actually say it's about 3. Even though it's a little shorter than that, we can actually say it's about 3 squares. So up here, I want you to do this as well. Please write in about 3 squares. It's not exactly 3 squares. Then when we look on to our next one, our eraser, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to start at the starting line, so line it up with the edge of the eraser, and then I'm going to very nicely line them up. And the eraser is a little shorter than 2 squares, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to say about 2 squares. So in your book, I want you to write in, the eraser is about 2 squares. Let's take a look at what Boom did. Boom uses 4 squares to measure a ribbon. Did Boom measure the right way? Why or why not? Take a look at how he measured. Did he line up all of his squares nicely? No, he didn't. So if we were to turn these 2 squares so they lined up with the other ones, we might have extra space. So whenever you're measuring, you want to line them up as nicely as possible with no spaces between them. Okay, and always start at the starting line and take a look at where they end. So Boom did not measure the right way because he did not line up his units or his squares. What happens if the first square is not lined up at the edge of the object being measured? So what happens if the first square is not lined up at the starting line? What do you think might happen? So I could show you, if I started, say I don't line it up with the starting line, and I just start right there. I might think it's almost 4 squares if I don't line it up like I was supposed to. So you always want to start at the starting line, otherwise your units are going to be off. Now you have an exit ticket, and it's one that you're going to press the orange share button. It says measure the length with squares. You have squares over here. You'll just drag them over. You're going to want to start on the starting line and then measure all the way, and it might not line up exactly. So in this box, you're going to tell me about how many squares was the length of that toothbrush. About how many. Doesn't have to be exact. And then you'll press share to show me what you're understanding about measuring objects with units or another tool.